Some of the comments that I see pop up a lot on my most recent build videos, for example on the Nomad video and on the Striker video that I just released a couple days ago, are people asking me why I'm not using the House, the new exotic weapon, instead of my lightweight M4s. That, or I'm getting the typical no House, bad build comments. Yeah, we also have a few of those. Now, of course, if you watched my best weapons for patch 1.8 video, you'll notice that the House is pretty much one of the highest DPS weapons in the game, and when it comes down to PvP body shots, it is the best weapon in the game. It's the hardest hitting SMG, it comes with a lot of crit because it is an SMG, and it has a super strong talent on it. So, yeah, why are we not always using the House? Well, there are actually a few reasons for that, but before I get into this video, I want to put a disclaimer right now saying that the House is in fact not a bad weapon at all. It is definitely one of the highest DPS weapons in the game. It's one of the best weapons in the game, so if you're using the House right now, you're not doing it wrong. Definitely not. This video is more going to be a personal preference, me explaining why I still prefer the M4 over the House, and I'll show you some of the downsides of actually using the House instead. That's all that this video is going to be. Just me explaining why I am still running with the M4. Nothing more. So yeah, let's get into it. Long story short, I don't really use the House, or any SMG for that matter, because of their lack in range and accuracy. Of course, I know that a lot of fights in PvP in the Division happen at close range, because more often than not, fights at long range are pretty meaningless because you oftentimes cannot confirm the kills, and other players can just get revived, they can just heal up and that kind of stuff. So usually, yeah, fights are not going to take place at long range, but I'm not just talking about long range when I say that the SMGs or the House lack range. I'm just talking about 15 to 25 meters at max. Let's look for example at some comparisons here. I've got two weapons, an M4 with responsive and forgiving and competent, and a House with competent, responsive and special talent, card counter. These talents might look strange at first glance because of course we're comparing two weapons, but they have completely different talents. But keep in mind that competent is not going to be active on the House and that we're not going to be using unforgiving on the M4 because we're not going to be taking any damage. So, for both of these weapons, we actually only have responsive, and then the House has the card counter talent, which is 20% damage over half of the magazine, and then the M4 has competent, which is 10% extra damage over the entire magazine. So yeah, they kind of balance each other out. Now we're gonna do this comparison with the Striker build. The Striker build that I created, 6k stamina, 7k firearms. But there's one major difference because we have different gloves here. The gloves are specifically built so that we can have a fair comparison because they neither have assault rifle damage or SMG damage on it. Instead, they have enemy armor damage, critical hit chance, and critical hit damage. Then I also modded both of these weapons with identical critical hit damage mods on both the muzzle, the scope, and the grip, and then I also used the extended magazine that you see almost everybody run with as well. This is pretty much as basic as we're going to get it, right? And if we use both of these weapons at close range, say about 6 or 7 meters away from the target, you'll notice that if we only hit body shots, the House is just a little bit stronger than the M4, and then when we only hit headshots, the M4 is just a little bit stronger than the House. Now, of course, how hard you're gonna hit, it's gonna depend a little bit on how many times you actually crit. This might make 1 or 2 bullets of a difference. And it of course also depends whether you get the 20% extra damage on the first or the second half of the magazine for the SMG. But basically, when I do this a couple times, when I do this test over and over and over again, you'll see that the difference between the M4 and the House is very, very minimal at this range. Going for headshots again will be a little more rewarding for the M4 due to the higher native headshot damage that the assault rifles come with, and going for body shots is going to be a little bit more effective with the House because of the critical hits. But honestly, running with the M4 instead of the House, or running with the House instead of the M4, that's not going to be the difference between winning or losing a fight most of the time. You know, you might have situations where the enemy lives with just 1 HP, and then having a House instead of an M4, yeah, that might have won you the fight. But in 99% of all situations, the House is not going to make that significant difference over the M4. Both of them are good options at this range. But now, let's actually take the fight to mid-range, the 15 to 25 meters that I was talking about. And if we compare the weapons here, you'll notice that the M4 is still able to land most of the shots. You know, we're missing some and we're not really getting headshots, but we're still landing most of our shots and we're taking the player down quite fast. But then if we switch over to the SMG, for example to the House the weapon starts to struggle a lot, not only because the optimal range is lower, but also because this weapon just has terrible accuracy compared to the M4. In some cases, we weren't even able to kill the guy with a full magazine. Now, I find that when I'm playing solo, it is very important that I have some kill potential at range, because oftentimes it can be really difficult to get closer to groups. And when you get closer to them, it's usually very easy for them to simply overwhelm you, because they can all come at you at the same time. You try to take one down, but then suddenly everybody jumps on you. That is usually how you're gonna lose most of the fights. And because of this, what I prefer to do is I like to start fights at a medium range, at that 15 to 25 meters. Where other players can't overwhelm me per se, because if they all start pushing on me, I still have enough time to run away and just dodge their bullets. But if I'm using the M4 and I've got that range and the accuracy, then I'm still able to wear them down bit by bit. And especially with Striker, this is very important because you're able to stack damage and healing stacks this way before the fight really starts. And you're putting damage on them, which then forces them to use medkits, heals, you know, all that stuff. And especially this meta, this patch, with so many players running Nomad or Predator and the House, everybody is just trying to run up to you and get closer to you because they can take a lot of damage because they have Nomad or a high amount of toughness due to Predator. And they need to get close because otherwise their house is going to be very, very bad, as I just showed you a minute ago. So if you play smart, you can actually exploit this a little bit by simply shooting a bit at a distance, then running away, then shooting a bit, then running away, and so forth and forth, allowing you to stay near 100 Striker stacks in most cases. And in the moment one of those group players gets enough of you and pushes just a little bit too far, that's the moment where you can go in and you can start the fight with like 80, 90 stacks on damage and healing, which then allows you to easily win that trade. Something like that, you cannot really do that with the House. Yeah, I mean, the damage trading when you're face to face with the House is maybe a little bit better, but trying to get stacks or trying to do any meaningful damage at further than 15 meters, it's just not going to happen. So if you want to go into a fight, you're going to have less stacks going into that fight with the House than with the M4, and thus the M4 is going to do a lot more damage. Now, some of you smart players might go down to the comment section right now telling me to just play the M4 as my primary weapon and then have the House as my secondary weapon, so that I can use the M4 at range to get stacks, to do some damage, to get, you know, to get some healing, and then as soon as they come close, I can just switch to the House and then face trade. And yeah, that might work. That is definitely not a bad idea, but I think that running two different primary weapons this patch is a pretty big mistake. And the reason for this is because of the percentage base damage on the gloves. This is simply too strong not to have. 12% damage of any weapon category is really, really big. And running with an assault rifle and an SMG on your build, that would also require you to get assault rifle damage and SMG damage at the same time on the gloves. Otherwise, there's no point in quickly switching over to the House if you don't have the 12% extra damage for the House. In that case, you're better off using the M4, because with the 12% extra damage, the M4 is going to hit harder still at close range. See what I'm going at here? If you want to play the assault rifle and the House effectively, you're going to need the 12% damage roll for both of them. So now you're looking at me and asking me what the problem is. I can just simply get both assault rifle damage and SMG damage on the gloves, right? But no, not really, because that would also be a bad idea, because that means that I would have to give up on either the critical hit chance or the critical hit damage roll on the gloves, which, if I may remind you, they both roll in very, very high amounts here. Nowhere else on your build, except for maybe the weapon mods, you can get 17% critical hit damage or 6% critical hit chance. Those numbers are very, very high, and if you have a damage-oriented build, then I think getting these are crucial to having a lot of burst. If I give up on either the critical hit damage or the critical hit chance, I'm going to lose a lot of burst on both the M4 and the House. And I would be lowering my overall DPS with both of those weapon types. Just compare it to somebody that's running, you know, just assault rifle damage with critical hit chance and critical hit damage. If I don't have assault rifle damage, SMG damage, and critical hit chance, I'm gonna lose out on 70% critical hit damage when we're shooting at each other, both just using the assault rifle. The damage rolls on the gloves are super essential to having a high DPS amount, and so are the critical hit rolls. So giving up on either of them would set you back quite far in the DPS department. And because I don't want to give up on either of them, that means that I can only have one weapon type damage. And because I only have one weapon type damage to pick from, I can only play one different weapon archetype, which means that my primary weapon and my secondary weapon, they have to be either 2 SMGs or 2 assault rifles or 2 LMGs or whatever weapon I'm going with. And because the SMGs, they suck so much at range, I choose to play with the M4 instead of the House. That is basically my whole thought process behind it. This is also why I'm not using the Showstopper or a sniper rifle with the striker stacks. What I could, for example, do, and I've seen a lot of people comment about this as well, is use the Bullfrog as my secondary weapon with responsive, unforgiving, and then the special talent. This weapon is an assault rifle, and it also hits pretty hard up close, just like the house. So I could use this weapon to swap out when people get close to me, and I would still get value out of the 12% damage roll without giving up on the critical hit chance or the critical hit damage. So yeah, the Bullfrog is something that I would consider a good alternative for my build. I'm not saying that running with the house is universally bad, that's not what this video is at all. As I mentioned at the start of the video, running with the M4 instead of the house is a personal preference that suits my playstyle more. I like to start fights at range. I like to shoot at people as they're trying to come closer to me and give myself a very big advantage before the fight starts, because not only am I going to have a lot of stacks, but they might have also already used their heal or have their Nomad proc before they even start shooting back. And something like that, you just cannot do that with the SMG. The SMGs, they do not have that kill potential, that threat at further than 10 meters range basically. But hey, do what you want to do. If you want to run with two houses, with two SMGs, be my guest. Honestly, I really don't care what you do with your builds, but since I've seen so many comments of players asking me and telling me to get the house instead of the M4, or why I'm not using the house instead of the M4 and all that stuff, I simply wanted to make a video about it, explaining why I don't think that the house is very good with the builds that I'm creating and the playstyle that I have. I like the house for D3 builds, and it can also be very good with Predator builds, but outside of that, I prefer weapons that are a little more versatile, and I make builds that suit that the most. But yeah, that was all for today though. If you have any questions, you know where to find me, and as always, I will see you guys later, or like they say in the Netherlands, zie je later.